Good morning, everyone in United States, and good evening to our distinguished panelists and other viewers from India. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and I am the President of the Council for Strategic Affairs. Thank you very much indeed for joining our roundtable discussion today. And as those of you who joined by registering on Eventbrite, this is our flyer for the current session. The topic of today's roundtable discussion is Russia's Vietnam, the Ukraine Quagmire. And today is Saturday, March 11, 2023. It's 10 a.m. Eastern Time in Washington, D.C. and 8:30 p.m. in India in New Delhi. A little bit of introduction for Council for Strategic Affairs. Council imparts education in the field of international relations. Council fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. CSA condemns terrorism in all forms and anywhere in the world. And CSA aims to contribute toward world peace and prosperity. A little bit about our usual programs. We have two recurring programs, a monthly roundtable discussion that is held on second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime that you are attending as of now. We have a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on the fourth Saturday of each month. The Council organizes symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publications of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. And Council has a summer internship program for college students. Those of you who want to have detailed information, please log on to our website, which is www.councilforstrategicaffairs.org. So let me start with introduction of our distinguished panelists. I must say that we are very fortunate to have a very high. We have three distinguished panelists with a combined 120 years of military experience. So our first panelist is Major General Shashi Bhushan Asthana, and you'll be seeing him. This is his picture. Major General Asthana is globally acknowledged as a strategic and security analyst who has authored more than 400 publications. He's a veteran infantry general with 45 years experience at national and varied international fields. And at this time, I'm proud to say that he is the director of India's largest military think tank, United Service Institution of India, which is based in New Delhi. He was a former Director General Infantry in Indian Army. He's a TV commentator, speaker in various forums, strategic, military, UN organizations, think tanks, universities. He has been interviewed by various national, international news channels, papers, organizations on strategic, military, and UN-related subjects. He is on the Governing Security Council Confederation of Education and Excellence, International Organization of Educational Development, and other UN organizations. He is on advisory board of multiple international panels and has received various commendations for his expertise. Our next distinguished panelist, and you will see him, is Major General Dhruv Katoch. General Dhruv Katoch is an alumnus of Sherwood College in Nainital, National Defense Academy, Khadagwasla, and the National Defense College, New Delhi. He was commissioned in the Dogra Regiment on March 31st, 1972. He has a distinguished career spanning nearly 4 decades. He has held instructional assignments in the Infantry School, MH Mao, which is Military Headquarters of War, and the Indian Military Academy, Dehradun, and senior staff appointments at the brigade, division, and corps level. Besides the NDC, The general officer is a graduate of the Defense Services Staff College in Wellington in Tamil Nadu and the Higher Command course at MHOW. He has vast experience in sub-conventional conflict, having taken part in the IPKF operations in Sri Lanka uh, and also operations against terrorists and insurgents in J&K and various states of Northeast India. He was commended by the Chief of Army Staff for operations against militants in Sri Lanka and was awarded Sena Medal while in command of his battalion in active operations on the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. He writes on defense and security related issues. He also writes on non-military issues, both fiction and issues of societal concern. He was the director of the Clause from November 2012 to October 2014. Clause, as most of you know, is the think tank of Indian Army. And actually, that's the time I got acquainted with him because I was trying to publish some articles on the CLAW website, and he was very gracious. He is currently the director of the India Foundation, a think tank. And lastly, our last distinguished speaker, and you will see him, is Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain. General Hasnain is highly decorated retired general of the Indian Army. His last assignment in the service was as military secretary of the Indian Army. Prior to that, he commanded the Indian Army's 15th Corps in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, amongst other appointments. He has also commanded the 21 Strike Corps. In 2018, General Hasnain was appointed Chancellor of Central University of Kashmir. He is a highly respected strategic thinker, author, TV commentator on strategic and defense matters. And there's not a single day that he is writing an article, publishing an article, or giving an interview somewhere. So we are very fortunate to have General Hasnain, and in fact, indeed, all our panelists. So the topic for today's discussion is Russia's Vietnam, the Ukraine Quagmire. Russia's so-called special military operation started in Ukraine on February 24, 2022, and it has stalemated into a no-win situation for either parties. Today, on March 11th, is the 381st day of the hot war. There are other parties also involved, and they're getting deeply sucked into this quagmire. Ukraine may have lost around 200,000 soldiers in this year-plus-long war, and it is estimated that the Russian casualties may also be in the same range, although no reliable figures are available. Irony is that this was a totally avoidable war, which could have been averted by genuine negotiations on the table. At this stage, no one can visualize the end game. Ukraine's president has been playing to the Western gallery and extorting financial and military aid, which is continuing to prolong the war. And Putin's megalomania has resulted in severe costs in terms of loss of equipment, soldier, and severe drain on Russian economy. NATO has de facto become an involved party in this war with consequences for all the members. US financial aid to Ukraine is now taxing the US taxpayers, and we are looking at a prolonged war in Europe that might lead to worldwide food crisis and financial recession. So our experts will discuss some of these issues. I put some pictures just to give the context. This is a crushed military vehicle of Russian army. This tells you the current battle of that is going on in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian and offensive against the Russian this thing. And this tells you again the hot areas where the activity is going on. This map actually gives you, what's happening, around Kharkiv city. As I said earlier, there are multiple parties to this war, not just Ukraine and Russia. EU is involved. United States is involved, NATO is involved, and there are non-state actors that are still supporting. They are also party to this war, and this is the famous owner of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is very actively an ally of Russian military. And lastly, I'll give some housekeeping rules before inviting my panelists. I would like everyone to remain unmuted to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone to vibration mode. Please do not interrupt our esteemed panelists. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves will be allowed to pose questions at the end of the presentation by panelists. All questions are moderated and have to be sent through the chat function. Please be precise in asking a question, don't send lengthy comments, etc. The event is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel within next 24 hours. So everything will be there. I am indeed very honored to invite our first panelist, Major General Shashi Bhushan Asthana, who will speak for 15 minutes, and then we'll follow by the next speaker. So General Asthana, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. Friends from the Council of Strategic Affairs, eminent panelists and viewers. It's a pleasure speaking on this forum. And every time I've spoken, one has always learned from the eminent panelists and from the question answer session too. Most interestingly, I must comment the topic which has been selected is quite an interesting one. Vietnam War, that is, when you say Russia's Vietnam and Ukraine Quagmire, certainly US-led NATO also comes into place. And perhaps it has many similarities. Vietnam War was also called as Cold War era proxy war. And it was also called as resistance war against United States. Now today it is resistance war against Russia. Earlier we thought that Cold War 1.0 is over when when USSR broke. But perhaps this war has renewed it. We thought we are into Cold War 2.0 between US and China. With Biden administration coming into the fold, apparently he shifted back to Cold War 1.0, and today we are in a state that after 1 year, we have mixed up Cold War 1.0 as well as Cold War 2.0. And we find that there is a growing miscalculations by parties with no clear end state, and that is what can describe this 1 year war. As before I proceed further, I must say that there are certain stark realities which both sides are hesitating to accept. And the first reality is that Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. So irrespective of the rhetoric, there is no case that you can annihilate or decisively defeat Russia without using at least one of them. And that puts the broader context or the limits of the war in place. The second reality is USA will not take the risk of annihilating Washington / New York to save Ukraine or even Poland. And therefore, it has implications. I'll cover that a little later. Given the kind of support which NATO is putting behind Ukraine, Russia also will not be able to annihilate Ukraine. And therefore, it will have to perhaps contend with some amount of captured territory with all the, shall I say, aims not achieved, and may land up into a long-term insurgency or internal security challenges. Europe will never be as prosperous again. Its security dimensions will absolutely change. And it is nobody's but Europe's fault in a manner that firstly, they didn't pay adequate attention to Russian security. And secondly, when they also played up to the gallery when America started, shall I say, a narrative of the kind which I'll talk about it a little later. And the last reality is no one will win this war. Everybody will be a loser. The only thing is who will be a lesser loser. That will define the whole thing. Now, let me put certain calculations and miscalculations in place. First, let me come to the Russian side. Russians have a calculation, and their premise is that NATO will stop short of nuclear escalation. They will avoid nuclear escalation, and to avoid that, they will perhaps not put boots on ground. And nuclear deterrence, therefore, will work, and it has worked so far. Even when NATO was giving offensive weapons or some kind of tanks and aircrafts are still under debate, they were also making the Ukrainian defense minister say repeatedly that this was for our defense and this will not be used against Russia, etc., etc. So they have caught on. Russians have caught on to this. Their calculation that they will be able to freeze Europe during winter months by choking energy has, I think, outlived its currency. So, because Europeans have physically endured it. And their next miscalculation was how much Ukraine will be able to resist. It is resisting with, of course, the US-led NATO's help. And also, they had miscalculated on the NATO's resolve to support Ukraine as to what is the limit of that resolve. Now, Russia is facing a situation wherein there is a possibility of offensive weapons coming, and therefore it would like to speed up its offensive to gain maximum before those weapons are effective in Ukraine. We also know that Russia is nowhere close to its strategic aim. Its original strategic aim was to capture Donbass, to create a corridor linking Russia and Donbass and Crimea, possibly extended to Transnistria, and thereby cut off Ukraine from the sea, and perhaps with that they'll be able to secure Crimea as well as their Black Sea access. With whatever gains they have made, apparently Odessa is a far-fetched dream, and therefore perhaps given the residual combat capability of Russia and the kind of incremental combat capability of Ukraine, apparently it is going to stalemate with little bit of grounds given here and there. But if you see the map, I think Russia has gained a fair amount of territory. The map which Dr. Adityanjee has shown, if you compare it with what was existing between 24th February 2022, then I think it will be US, NATO and Ukraine, everybody put together, an achievable dream to reach that position, which they will perhaps never reach. Russia also knows that it has a limitations in terms of the economic, diplomatic, information warfare and political warfare capabilities, which is highly skewed in favor of NATO. And therefore, nuclear threat is an option, and it will keep using as long as it is possible. Now to NATO. Now, NATO wants this war to be restricted to Ukraine and should continue. And why so? Because if the war is not confined to Ukraine, and if, let's say, hypothetically, something happens in Poland. USA will be faced with a dilemma. Either you go for an all-out nuclear war, or you shy away from the obligation of NATO for protecting some part, and it will be a very difficult situation. And therefore, the better option for them is that keep arming Ukraine, let Russia get weakened, and without the burden of body bags, if you can fight till last Ukrainian standing, that is the best case scenario. And this best case scenario has not been planned today. If you see the writings of Sean McFadden, he said that West is not winning any war. If the technology and conventional weaponry could win war, USA would not have lost in Vietnam and they would not have lost in Afghanistan. The fact is that they have lost, and therefore he was under the impression that shadow war is the unanswer. Now, what is a shadow war? It's exactly the hybrid war and a proxy war which they are fighting through Ukraine, through shoulders of Zelensky. And you had a willing Zelensky into place who is ready to take it on. So, therefore, without the burden of body bags, if somebody can carry on this fight, that suits Russia, that suits America, that suits its warlords, the weapon lobby, it suits the energy lobby, it also suits some of the politicians in some manner, and they are the entities who are most interested in prolonging the war. Because otherwise, if you take this out, then bulk of the world perhaps wants this war to end. The second issue is that the incremental military has become a necessity. Despite leakages and despite the corruption scandals, they are continuing with it. And they are also testing Putin's patience, because they are also taking a calculated risk that even Putin may not like to raise a nuclear alarm, or not alarm, I would say, will not like to go to a nuclear dimension. And therefore, there is a space in which we can press on Russia a little more. And therefore, they are also taking a chance on that. So, whether it is a calculation or miscalculation, only time will tell. Because, as I said, if Putin is pushed to a corner, then he will not give up. With 6,000 nuclear weapons and hypersonic weapons in his armory, expecting that he will not use any and given to the demands of NATO, I don't think that's a possibility which should be accepted. Secondly, the US-led NATO's calculation has also gone on as far as the sanctions are concerned. They thought that Russians' 2 trillion economy versus 30 trillion of the entire NATO put together stands nowhere. But then the fact is that today Europeans' GDP growth is lesser than Russia, and so is the case of US, and UK is already in minus. As far as the other story which is in pipeline nowadays is who blew Nord Stream 2. Now that is $1 million question for Europeans too, because there is nobody else other than United States which has a visible interest, and the kind of jubilation which Blinken made after that, now Europe will no more be dependent on them, followed by the revelations of Seymour Hersh and of a number of Europeans. In fact, I had a slide, I'm skipping the presentation, the slides. If you see the location where the blast has taken place, there is no way that the Germany did not know, the Denmark did not know, and Sweden did not know, because that is the area which falls into the EEZ of all these three countries. So there is no way that somebody else would have done it. And besides, notwithstanding the kind of information warfare you are saying, the whole world cannot be fooled by imagining that Russia blew its own pipeline, it blew its own bridge, it created an attack on itself, and the whole world is expected to believe that. I don't think that's a little far-fetched one, because even for information warfare to succeed, there is a principle that it must be mixed with some truth. So minus, if the truth, the percentage of truth is too low, then the information warfare also fails. As far as EU is concerned, they face a very bigger challenge in a manner that their economic and energy security concerns and energy security interests, they have been compromised, number one. They are facing tremendous amount of refugees, which will remain. A number of refugees may not return back to Ukraine. All the mercenaries, so-called volunteers, so-called non-state actors which are fighting in Ukraine from Europe, they will come back to Europe and create internal security situation forever. Because there is nothing like unemployed jihadi. Because once somebody has a clamor to earn money out of weapon, then he never gives up so easily. Similarly, when we talk of the other hypocrisy, so when we talk of sanctions, till date, the America is buying nuclear fuel from Russia. During this 1 year of war, the purchase of nuclear fuel by America from Russia has increased, and therefore rest all is optics. So everybody is looking after his interest. Now let me talk about Ukraine. Ukraine actually has no choice. Zelensky has no choice. He was put in place, follow a particular narrative. He has followed it. He can't go back now. Much is being made out of democracy, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Now let me put all the three perspectives in place. Democracy of, everybody says, the West says, we are fighting for democracy of Ukraine. On the first day of the war, it was a martial law declared. Ukraine is no more a democracy. Zelensky is a martial law dictator as of today. That is the status for last 13 months. When we talk of sovereignty, yes, earlier there was a Russian-oriented leader before Zelensky. Now it is US-oriented leader. Zelensky could say, actually, if you see why he is fighting, NATO has not promised that we will give you NATO membership, and NATO cannot give him NATO membership because one of the conditions for NATO membership is that the country involved should not be involved in an external or internal conflict. Ukraine is involved in both. So the question of getting a NATO chair doesn't arise. Despite that, Zelensky is fighting that I must have a sovereign right to say that I want to join NATO. Now, if for that, if you are ready to risk 8 million refugees and 6 million internally displaced persons, history will say as to what Zelensky is up to. But the fact is, yes, he resented that his sovereign rights should not go to Russia, but today he cannot make a sovereign decision without Washington's concurrence. And therefore, today his sovereign rights are hostage to USA. So, where is the sovereignty? When we talk of territorial integrity, his territorial integrity as it existed on 24th of February. You see the map and decide as to what is the kind of territorial integrity it is today. Now, irrespective of the rhetoric created by the West, the fact is that the professionals of Pentagon and their Chief of Defense Staff itself is saying, although his voice keeps getting muted, that you cannot throw out Russians. It's not all that easy. If HIMARS have been given out of proportion to Ukraine, today the reserves of USA for HIMARS, to create those reserves, USA requires 8 years. Similarly, for the other weaponry, USA requires 8 to 13 years to get back to the reserves. And that is where the China has got an advantage. And that is why I have said that they have badly mixed up Cold War 1.0 and Cold War 2.0. And then comes where USA is losing. That is the wildcard entry of China. Today, the alliance between China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, North Korea is becoming stronger. USA's biggest stronghold was its grip on the world financial system. Today, the whole world is looking at alternative currency. India is looking at alternative currency. BRICS is looking at BRICS currency. SCO is looking at expansion. BRICS is looking at expansion. So, therefore, if the whole world starts trading in some manner. It cannot happen overnight. It will take at least 10 to 15 years for the world to get into a de-dollarized or partially dollarized economy. But then the fact is that the race for that is faster than ever. And that is where the long-term interest is jeopardized. So therefore, what is the way ahead before I finish? Firstly, in my opinion, uh, there is a stalemate kind of situation. Both sides are hoping that perhaps a little prolongation of war can give them a better situation to negotiate, which I think is a misnomer, because hereafter the fighting will be tough on both sides. We have seen that the kind of weaponry which Ukraine will get is the weaponry which Russia already has. If with that weaponry they could not progress beyond a point, because of the built-up area, because of the terrain friction of built-up area, then Ukraine is no different. And therefore, I do not visualize that the front lines will change very much. They will change substantially, or they will change marginally, but not substantially. And as far as Russia is concerned, yes, they have gained much more territory than what they had on 24th of February. But the possibility of Finland joining NATO will give additional 1,000 kilometers direct border with NATO. That is also not beneficial to Russia. So as I said, everybody will lose in this war. Nobody is going to, and then the problem is that this region will certainly go into irregular war for quite some time, and that is where I go back to the topic which was said, that yes, it will be a Vietnam kind of situation. In that situation, USA had to pull back. USA was in direct conflict, and the remaining countries, the two countries, they became communist, whether it was Vietnam or Cambodia and Laos. In this particular case, maybe some other countries like Sweden and Finland may become NATO. And Russia, certainly the boundaries of Ukraine would have changed forever. The rhetorics can keep saying, they can keep declaring Ukraine as winner and Zelensky as hero for as long as they want. But then the fact is, the military professionals don't agree with too much of gains by NATO. And the nuclear war, I don't think anybody would venture, given the current conditions and the kind of mutually assured destruction which it promises. So I rest my case. We will take more things during the question answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Major General Asthana, for a very lucid discussion and presentation. Now it's my honor to invite our second panelist, Major General Dhruv Katoch. So, General Katoch, the floor is yours, sir. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. I'll cut to the chase, straight. Now, this war has been ongoing for a year plus now, a year and a month or so. It'll be very shortly. I will confine myself to three specific aspects. What is going to be the likely end state? One, what constitutes victory for different groups? And thirdly, will it prolong, and will it actually become something what we call Russia's Vietnam or Russia's Afghanistan or whatever? I don't want to delve into the politics or the morality of the war. Everybody has their own views. But there are a few things which I want to put across as far as this war is concerned. When it started in February last year, people like me, we were on many panels, and I didn't see a single panelist across the globe who thought that it would prolong in this particular manner. So the first part of it is every analyst has got it wrong. I mean, let's start with that, including me. We're wrong. So what I'm about to say is I may be wrong again, and that is really part of the business of analysis. But this one, I think, in my view, what Russia really intended was a very short, swift campaign. They were not interested in territory. They were not interested in sort of destruction and killing people. They wanted a very swift. So if they had managed that within the first 3 to 4 days, I think the whole scenario would have changed, and we would have, the defense analysts across the world would have been proved right. In a sense, I think the Russian military was hopelessly incompetent. Their strategic foresight as far as the higher leadership, oh, that was pathetic, absolutely pathetic. When you see tanks moving in single file as if they are on a parade ground, when you see troops getting into war without adequate logistics, I think a very large portion of their senior leadership should have been sacked. That is to put it mildly. It was sheer incompetence. But having said that, when you look at the second phase of the war, what was of interest to Russia? There were two things. One, they didn't want Ukraine to become a part of NATO because that would imply, regardless of the fact whether they would or would not have become, but the threat was there. That would really imply that nuclear weapons can be placed on NATO soil, and obviously they would be directed at Russia. That was a red line which Russia would never accept. And the second point, I think, which they wanted to ensure was control over the Black Sea. So when we look into the second phase of the operations, I think the Russians have succeeded absolutely as far as those operations are concerned. They have got control of the Donbas region. They have taken Zaporizhia. They have taken Kherson. And when you look at it, when you draw a line from Kharkiv, they haven't got Kharkiv, it was retaken, but when you draw a line from the north, you take the entire coastal belt, you see. The Sea of Azov is totally under Russian control. We had those two ports, the ports which the Ukrainians had. Now they are with the Russians. And then you come down, Crimea was already there, Sevastopol was with the Russians, and they have also taken, the taken area right up to Kherson. So we have today, as far as Ukraine is concerned, their access to the sea is only through Odessa. That is the last place. And Odessa, I was just going through what the British had been writing about it and certain other European countries, and they were saying Odessa can never fall. But when I carried out my analysis, I said, listen, these chaps have already got this land bridge. Crimea is safe now. They've got a land bridge right up to Kherson, right? On the other side, on Moldova, on the eastern coast is Transnistria, right, where the Russians are in control. And in between is sandwiched Odessa. I don't think the Russians will take Odessa, but the reasoning is quite different. I think they will let Ukraine maintain Odessa as a port, that they have access to the sea, but which will always be under threat because that is going to be their peace option. In my view, they will say, okay, we'll give you this, but no more, stop. So when we are looking at Russia, their strategic objective of regime change has not been achieved. But when we are looking at their operational objectives, I think they have been achieved to a very great measure. They have got total control over the Sea of Azov. They have got partial control of, in fact, as far as they are concerned, only they've got control over the Black Sea because they can restrict the shipping of Ukraine from Odessa. That's a very simple point. And if push comes to shove, I won't be surprised if they go in for that also. The Russians are not interested in taking any more land. So I think their operational objectives have been achieved. Now they will be looking, as far as I'm concerned, for a peace objective. Okay, they may declare a ceasefire, they may do something, and then hopefully say, okay, let us stop it here. But for Russia, anything short of maintaining what they have already captured will be a strategic defeat, and I don't think Russia will accept that. Ukraine, they would want Russians to get out and get back to the pre-2014 line. That is not going to happen. So that is another reality, and I don't think the Ukrainians can do anything much about it. Now that leaves two other major players, that is NATO and the United States. I disagree partially with my friend General Asthana. I don't think America has lost this. America has won this round completely. What did America want? They wanted two objectives. They wanted NATO to get together again. Otherwise, NATO was becoming a soft sort of a thing. They weren't arming and they were getting very close to Russia. And if there was mutual dependence on Russia and Europe, which was to the benefit of Europe, that was something which the Americans did not want. So they are very happy with the war. Now NATO is totally aligned with the United States. The United States has won that round. It has also won because the military industrial complex has become very, very strong. And no body bags of Americans are there. So when America says, okay, I'm going to give so much aid or I'm going to do so and so, etc., well, they're selling their weapons and they're quite happy about it. They're getting their kickbacks, whatever it is. They haven't lost this war. They have gained everything. Russia stands weakened. NATO has become non-effective. And I will be bold enough to say NATO today or Europe today has actually, in real terms, become a vassal state of the United States. And now we come to the fourth player, which is NATO. You see, they have survived this winter, but there are many more winters to come. And energy prices will always rise because the cheapest supply was from Russia. You've destroyed, the pipeline. Both the pipelines, the Nord Stream pipelines, have been destroyed, and there is no way in which that is going to revive. So when Europe is going to have energy dependency on other sources from America and other sources, I think it is going to be a very expensive proposition for them. The prices are going to rise, and we will find civil disturbances coming up in the capital cities, which have already started. NATO, I'm afraid, without fighting the war, is a loser. Having said that, I'll come very quickly to what do I view as the end state? In my view, there's only one state which is possible, which can lead to something which will be, well, I won't say acceptable to all, but something which is possible. And that is you maintain the existing line. There is no way in which that situation is going to change. So when we are looking at the line, as of now, from the Donbas region coming down to Zaporizhia and then on to Kherson, when you make that arc, I think the Russians will be quite satisfied to say, okay, we'll stop here. We will not go for Donbas. And that could be a possible end state. Now, Ukraine, of course, will not agree to that. But I don't think anybody will be asking Ukraine their opinion. Their opinion is irrelevant. They are fighting somebody else's war on their soil with their soldiers. So Ukraine's opinion is totally irrelevant in my view. This is one. Europe, I think NATO will be quite prepared with some sort of an arrangement like this. NATO will say, okay, if we can stop it here, and if it doesn't go further, well, let's get back to living. Let's get back to our economy and other things. The United States, I think I have a feeling that the United States may also agree to this, because even the RAND report has stated very recently that a prolongation of this war is not to America's interest. In my view, I think it can stop. Now, my final point I want to give, America's Vietnam. I beg your pardon. Will this become Russia's Vietnam? I just want to give a few statistics. When we are looking at a country under occupation, it is very difficult for the occupier to hold on to that territory. Anyway, so when the Russians came into Afghanistan, it was practically impossible to hold that vast stretch because the local population is not with them. Similarly, when the Americans were in Vietnam, you're fighting a war thousands of kilometers from your borders, right? You're fighting in an alien territory. Your troops don't know what the hell they are fighting for. The morale aspect also comes in. So these wars are unwinnable. But the Russian case is different. When they are fighting, and when they have, if you go to the end state as per my theory, if that is going to be the end state, then let us take the population of Donbas. We are talking on the north, we have the Luhansk region, then we have the Donetsk region. 45 to 50% of the population was already Russian, right? There are a few more things which I want to give out here. When we talk of Zaporizhia, about 27% of the population is Russian speaking. When we talk of Sevastopol and when we talk of Crimea, it's something like 60%. So when you're looking at this entire stretch, a very large percentage of this population is already pro-Russia. But what has happened to that anti-Russia forces, what you call the Ukrainians? Now, we have had about 6 to 8 million people who have fled from this area, and another about 5 to 6 million people who have become refugees in Europe. Some of them have come back. But let us take a ballpark figure of 8 million people who have left. Now, where have these 8 million come from? Have they come from Kyiv? Most unlikely. They have come from this region. They have come from the region where the war is being waged. And who are these people who have been moved out? It is the people who supported Ukraine. So when we are now looking at the population which is existing in this area, I'm afraid the percentages have undergone a major change. What is the population of Donetsk? 4 million people. When we look at Luhansk, 2 million plus. Kharkiv, 2 million plus. Odisha, 2.3 million. Zaporizhia, 1.7 million. Now, when you take this entire population of this area and you take out 6 to 8 million, well, what is rest is the Russian population. So I don't visualize any problem which the Russians are going to face in holding on to that area once they have stabilized the front line. And I visualize over the next 3 to 4 months, there will not be a Russian intent to go deep inside. They will simply stabilize a line which is defensible. These lines are difficult to defend because if you carry out a terrain analysis, these are all open countries. But then there are many rivers, rivulets, etc., which crisscross the area. What Russia, they will have to get onto a suitable defensive position and then say, okay, we stop here. And if Ukrainians continue their attack, then we will bomb Kyiv and we will take Odisha. So if you want peace, you hold on here. We have a bargaining chip. We are allowing you to stick on to Odisha. That will be very kind of them. Of course, it will be difficult for the Russians to capture it also, but it is possible. I disagree with the British version which says it is impossible. Or no, it is highly possible and doable. I don't think the Russians will go to that extent anyway. In my view, it will be strategically an imperative to let Ukraine have something to hold on to. And I visualize sometime this year, again, as I said, analysts have gone wrong, but I visualize sometime this year, there is going to be a ceasefire. It is going to be on the lines which I have stated. It may not lead to a lasting peace, but at least it will lead to the firing stopping. And I don't think the Ukrainians are in a position to keep hammering out at the Russians and making it a quagmire for them, making it their Vietnam. In my view, that's not going to be possible. But for the good of the world, everybody, I think, is affected in terms of energy prices and food prices. I do hope this war comes to an end. And with that, I close. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Major General Dhruv Katoch, for your analysis, slightly different emphasis and different, direction of analysis. And now it is my pleasure to invite our final and most distinguished panelist, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain. General Saab, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adityanjee. Thank you very much. And my compliments to my fellow panelists for outstanding presentations they have given, made my life so simple, given me the best opportunity to talk less. Before I begin, let me say, my pleasure. General Katoch and I happen to be from the same school. So, Dr. Adityanjee, when you mentioned that he's from Sherwood, Nainital, so am I from Sherwood, Nainital. And we both today are parts of the India Foundation. My pleasure in being with him on this panel again. I agree with much of what has been said by both the fellow panelists, but I've got maybe a difference of opinion in one or two issues, not too many. It starts with the fact that this commentary is without taking any sides. I follow the Indian policy. We are absolutely neutral. But unlike Vietnam, when the world was open, today you are in an information controlled world where all kinds of information is being put out in forms of psychological warfare, information strategy, communication strategy. One doesn't know what to really believe. And can we really surmise based on the information which is flowing in the media, in the American media, all kinds of things which are being put across, which are not really true. And the same thing it happens as far as the Russians are concerned. So that is one aspect. For example, the Ukrainians today, I think yesterday, have said that Putin will probably be killed by his own circle, his own friends and colleagues close to him, because they suspect that he will take Russia to its doom. Now, this kind of a thing is typical information warfare, putting it out, psychological, this thing to be put out to the population. I was hopeful that the ceasefire would come about by February. I failed. I failed in my assessment completely. But I do believe that victory and defeat in this war cannot be defined. Or let me put it differently. There can be no concept of absolute victory or absolute defeat. These will be qualified victories and qualified defeats, which means that it will be a virtual stalemate with one side or the other having a slight advantage. But that situation may not remain like that. It may continue because in many ways one looks at this as a potential long war. And long wars can sometimes carry on without any exchange of hostilities at all. You may find a couple of weeks of absolute silence on the front battle lines, and then suddenly a surge taking place. That kind of a situation is very much possible. I'll come to it separately. I've made out a list of questions for myself, and I hope to be able to try and answer them. First of all, I don't think you can give a long-term kind of a view or commentary and assessment under the circumstances with the kind of information available. Whatever I'm going to be speaking about is mid-state, somewhere in the next 6 months to a year, year and a half maximum. And I think that more and more that we are examining this issue, we are tending to make it more and more complex. So I would love to go back, take a step back and go back to the 24th of February. Why did this war begin? And I think not too many commentators are asking themselves this question today. Why did this war begin? And I start by my first article which I wrote on this, the assessment that I wrote. It started with the Treaty of Versailles, the mistake that the Allies made in 1919, pushing Germany to the wall and forcing them within 20 years to come back to war against them. Similarly, in 1989, conflict termination, the Americans had no idea. And this is something the Americans have never somehow learned, conflict termination. 1989, they should have been happy what they had achieved, but they wanted to push Russia eastwards, back. And Russia was weak, extremely weak at that time. And leadership was very weak, economy was very weak. It was under dismantlement. Its nuclear arsenal was getting dismantled. Some of it was coming back from Kazakhstan, from Ukraine and places like that. So Russia was in no position to be able to contest all this. But as time went by and Russia became more powerful and you had a stronger leadership like Putin, the national pride returned and they said, we can't allow this to happen. And obviously, by that time, the eastward march of NATO was quite distinct. They had reached very deep into the east, and Ukraine would have actually been the final nail virtually. But as General Katoch very correctly said, although he didn't deliberate on it, I know why he didn't deliberate, because of shortage of time. Black Sea. The Russians cannot do without the Black Sea. If you push the Russians out of the Black Sea, where do they go in this world? And Russia, with 144 million population, a former superpower, a member of the Security Council, has access to the sea only in the Pacific at Vladivostok or in the Arctic Circle. What about this entire area of the Mediterranean, the area of the Black Sea, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf? This is the area which is the center of gravity of the world. Russians are not going to give that. 2015, they came here to Syria, they came to Latakia, to that port of Latakia, primarily because they knew that if this port goes away from their control, they have no access to, they have no other port in the Mediterranean. Similarly here, Sevastopol was so important. The Sea of Azov is so important. This Odessa is so important for them. But through access from here, the Black Sea Fleet and everything else, is the strategic advantage or strategic balance that they achieve is through the access of the Black Sea. So the Russians are going to fight tooth and nail, although they've achieved a lot already, as very correctly General Katoch has already mentioned. Why did the Russians fail in the initial offensive? Well, exactly the reasons why they are failing at Bakhmut at the moment. Now, everyone is thinking that Bakhmut, they're achieving, they're succeeding. To my mind, I don't think they're really succeeding. One report says 30,000 dead Russians. 30,000 dead in one battle. My God, the demographics of Russia, if you are aware of, 144 million population coming down to 130 to 134 million in the next 10 years. That is it's a dwindling population. Body bags going back home. My God, Russia can't fight this war if that is the kind of casualty situation today. They came in mid blunders, absolutely strategically. Their generals should have been sacked right at the beginning. They forgot everything about the operational maneuver group and things of doctrines of the good old days of the Warsaw Pact. They forgot everything. 64-kilometer long, single file kind of a tank lineup coming in and not moving an inch in 48 hours. Obviously, they're going to be bombed out everywhere. Coming and getting hold of the airport at Kiev and not being able to hold on to it. I mean, these are strategic blunders. To think that they're going to achieve everything, I mean, go very deep beyond what they've achieved already would be a fallacy. But I think the Russians will be content with what they've achieved so far. And may not want to show it that way. Putin would like to show as if he still has the ambition to take over the whole of Ukraine. But his capability obviously is highly suspect. The Russian economy has been able to sustain the sanctions up to a point. How far more can they go? Will the Chinese come to their help? The Chinese don't come to anyone's help. You've seen what's happened to our neighbors. You've seen what's happened to Sri Lanka, although recently I've just heard that they're trying to bail them out to some extent now. But the Chinese are not going to give any free lunches to Putin, right? And all this noise which is happening in the international environment at the moment, where Blinken is always warning the Chinese not to help Russia with weaponry, etc. I don't think the Chinese are going to make a lot of noises, but I don't think they're going to commit themselves completely. So the Russians are to a great extent on their own. And that makes it very suspicious whether they have the capability to continue fighting for very long. One or two other points in this particular context. Can Ukraine survive the current military offensive, missile attacks, bomb attacks? Can it carry out a counteroffensive? No, I try and take you back 6 months. We heard of the very famous Ukrainian counteroffensives at that time. I thought this was the biggest misnomer. These were not counteroffensives. Counteroffensives are designed for something more. These were riposts, which were essentially hitting the bases from which the Russians had come inside. These were 10 to 8 kilometers, 15 kilometers inside. And the success that they achieved was because of the weight of the attacks that they had. They went in with a lot of armor. They lost a lot of armor themselves. And today, if someone thinks that Ukraine can continue fighting with 48 additional tanks which NATO wants to provide them, they should be laughing in NATO's face rather than taking those 48 tanks. So both sides are actually running out of options. So the question really is, can this war continue for long? Or can it just dwindle into a no war, no peace kind of a situation? The other alternative is what we talk about, Wagner, the Wagner group. Can this come down to a proxy war? Now that is a very, very interesting aspect. And the whole aspect of proxy war, Wagner, Islamist elements coming in here, etc. Because this area is open to all kinds of things here. You can bring in people from Chechnya. The Russians have got available. They can bring in fighters from Chechnya. They can bring them in as proxy fighters or whatever it is. And others can bring in other fighters into this area. This war can continue in terms of proxy or in the proxy context in this area for very long. But to my mind, I don't think it's going to come to that situation too. I think it will dwindle down to a kind of a no war, no peace kind of a situation for some time until there is a bit of a refurbishment on both sides, right? And then lesser intensity, perhaps the war may just continue. And that's what I said. You are looking at 6 months, you're looking at a year. This is the time when the international community should be making use of this. And pushing for a ceasefire, pushing for negotiations, coming to the negotiating table. Putin, unlikely the personality that he is, the maverick element, which is there's a part of his personality, I have my doubts he will come to the negotiating table in a hurry. More likely that he is going to be under tremendous pressure internally, and this assessment which has been given by Zelensky may very well be right to that extent. I'm coming to the end of my part of the intervention. A few more things which I would just like to say. India's role. I think US accepts our neutrality. Is accepted it after a early dithering here and there. They've accepted it. No Katsa imposed on us, right? Our relationship is going beyond, and you've seen in the Blinken visit here, you've seen the optics which are very much there, the Quad optics which are also there, important aspect of India being considered as a very important partner for the Indo-Pacific. The National Security Advisor's visit to Moscow. But an intervention by India to act as a mediator, I don't think that is going to happen in a Mr. Modi, the Honorable Prime Minister, made a brilliant intervention in the month of August, I think, in the SCO summit, on the sidelines of the SCO summit. Brilliant intervention which went internationally viral. But I don't think the Russians would want us to come into this. Or at least Putin thinks that he can probably win this war. That's why he doesn't want us to come into it. And therefore, to an extent, from the Indian side also, we would not like to be seen to be taking the initiative to act as elements of mediation in this, unless there is a potential positive outcome. We don't want to be seen as mediating here to fail at the end of it. Of course, any event you undertake, any initiative you undertake can fail. The possibility of success here is much less. The only thing is that India will, yes, perhaps increase its own stature internationally to an extent, but it will not want to be seen to be failing in this kind of a role that it has assumed for itself. At the end of my intervention, I think I've spoken enough. I have one or two questions more which I could be answered. Lavrov's body language at the Raisina dialogue, I was there to see it. His responses to Sanjay Joshi, very aggressive, full of confidence. It appeared that the Russians either were putting up a great show, or actually they do perceive that this war is winnable. And if that is the perception that is prevailing in the leadership in Russia, I don't think the next 6 months are going to see a ceasefire coming about anywhere. There may be temporary holdbacks and a return to a war again. A military victory at the end of the day by Russia appears to be improbable. At the same time, the Ukrainians to think that they can fight the war on behalf of NATO and defeat Russia in the battlefield is also a misnomer. So I think what you ultimately come down to is a situation of a stalemate, which is inevitable, a no war, no peace situation, which is inevitable. Political diplomacy will probably have to take over at some stage or the other, but a ceasefire in the very near future does not seem to be coming about. Perhaps we should be looking at a period of 6 months to a year from now. I'll rest my case here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, General Hasnain. We had three brilliant panelists, a combined military experience and wisdom of more than 120 years, giving their viewpoints. Before I open it to general discussion using my prerogative as the moderator, I'm doing something very unusual. I'm going to invite somebody from the audience who I noticed if this is what he is, I believe that retired Air Marshal R.C. Bajpai has logged in and has been listening to this whole discussion. I would like to invite Air Marshal R.C. Bajpai to make a few comments from his perspective as an Air Force veteran, because it's not just a land war, there is use of air and space capabilities. So, Air Marshal Bajpai, if you are there, we would like to hear your comments, please.
Well, it has been very good discussion from all panelists. Their kind of thinking is very correct on the right lines. It has been a very long drawn war. Probably even Russia didn't anticipate that this will stretch for so long. Now America is determined to enter into the fray right from day one. They had been trying to instigate Ukraine, and all their games were in this direction, that is, Ukraine must come to the NATO fold, while Russia was resisting all these things. And Russia will continue to do this. Having gone so far, Russia is not going to give up so easily. My only fear is that it should not escalate into a kind of different of nuclear to a limited extent. It can't be a full, otherwise it's going to be very devastating, which I think Russia will not do that. But certainly a localized kind of use of nuclear power may not be out of place, because they may use something of this type. Because if the NATO is trying to put in all the kind of efforts, all the weapons and machinery into Ukraine, it's going to be very difficult. And Russia also has got limited resources. It can't be unlimited. And they have already spent most of it. What is left out, because now I can see whatever is coming in the news, that they are depending on North Korea and other countries. China also is assisting them in what way? That is, of course, not known to the people, but certainly they are, whether it is support by equipment or by kind of counseling or suggesting something, but certainly it has continued for a long time, and it's not good for everything. The economy is going to be affected very badly. Already it has affected all over the world, and that's not going to be a kind of easy thing to sort out so easily. So I don't think the future is so bleak, but certainly it has affected the development and the progress of the world as a whole. And I wish it may be whether India or China or some other countries, they join hand and try to persuade both. Zelensky is not prepared to give in, while Russia also is determined to whatever they have annexed so far. And as we can see, as the war is developing, more and more damage is being done. So I hope that good sense prevails, and they should come to the negotiating table and try to sort out their issues. And whatever they have got, whether Ukraine has got some part back and Russia has some part of the Ukraine, and they should stop some, whatever they have achieved so far, they should stop wherever they are, and they should come to the negotiating table rather than continuing this war, which seems to be very difficult for the near future. But one day they have to come. Otherwise, the whole world is going to be affected like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Air Marshal Vajpayee, for your comments. I'm indeed very delighted that you attended the whole discussion and gave your comments. And now we will go on to questions and answers that are being posed. Just one comment before I open the Q&A. Air Marshal Vajpayee talked about, Zelensky will not be interested in holding negotiations. And the same point was made by all our distinguished panelists, that what are Zelensky's expectations probably may not be fulfilled and nobody is going to listen to him. I think historically, when military historians write the history of this particular conflict, Zelensky will be remembered, quote unquote, as the useful idiot of the West, ideological West, which may include European Union, NATO, and United States. This particular person who likes to play to the audience, keeping in mind his previous profession as a comedian, as an actor, likes to play to the gallery. But in this whole process, he has managed to get his country destroyed, economy ruined, people, killed unnecessarily, just at the instigation of quote unquote ideological West. So, for the time being, he may be spurring nationalistic, jingoistic feelings in Ukraine and putting up a stiff resistance. But when history evaluates him, it will evaluate and characterize him as the useful idiot of the ideological West who got his country ruined. So, with those comments, I'm going to go on to the question and answer. The first question was by Dr. Minarul to General Asthana about the reference for US's purchase of uranium from Russia. And General Asthana already sent the exact reference on the chat function, so there's no need to elaborate on that particular question. The second question is for General Katoch from Manoj Channan. Sir, with a predominant military threat of NATO versus US, has Russia really committed his army? If you look back at Russian domination of Syria, including complete EW, block of communication, this is not witnessed in Ukraine conflict. Your views, please. So this is for General Dhruv Katoch.
Thank you. You see, when we are looking at what is happening in West Asia, especially with reference to Syria, it was a regime change operation which was planned by the West to get President Assad out. And it was Russian intervention which has actually kept Assad in. Now, it is very difficult to look at the fighting which is taking place in West Asia, in Syria, Iraq, etc., and try to compare that with the fighting which is taking place in Ukraine. There are two completely different types of wars. When we are looking at what is happening in Syria, in Iraq, and other places, it is much more like an insurgency. And when we are looking here, it is a different war. So I don't think there can be a comparison. But has Russia committed all its forces in the Ukraine war? No, they haven't. But they have committed a sizable amount of their forces. In my view, they have got enough ammunition, especially in terms of artillery, to continue this war ad infinitum. They have the resources, they have the guns, they have the ammunition, and that is the way the ground battle is going to go. In my view, they are not interested. It is my view. I could be wrong. I don't think they are interested in really capture of territory. Russia has got enough land, but it was, as also mentioned by General Hasnain, it was to get security of the Black Sea. So if you look at the map, the oblast which they have taken is along the coast, which gives them security as far as the Sea of Azov is concerned, and as far as the Black Sea is concerned. Crimea was already theirs, and they have stretched it up to Kherson. So I think they have achieved in my view, their operational objectives, and I still maintain that they will keep the Odessa option open. That is going to be the bargaining chip. You've got to give the enemy some escape route. So he's been told, okay, we'll allow your shipping, you can carry on, but we'll stop here. And if Zelensky doesn't agree, well, just too bad, because that is going to be the end state, whether he likes it or not. I think that's it. That's my view. I hope it partially answers what you were asking.
Next question is this conflict dangerous for Latin America or Africa? And I will invite any panelist to give their viewpoint.
I'll come in on this from the angle of economics, development. You see, we've just come out of a pandemic, and it has affected the world. You can compare it to the pandemic 100 years ago. The pandemic almost coincided with the end of the First World War, with the Treaty of Versailles, and later created a commotion economically all over the world, leading to if you remember the very famous Great Depression in America in 1929. So at the moment, you cannot really predict what is going to be the status economically of these areas in particular. Food security wise, lots of countries of Africa have depended on Ukraine. Actually, one doesn't realize Ukraine has been a granary, a food basket to a great extent. The quality of grain which comes out from here, precision machinery to a great extent in these areas of Odessa and all along the Black Sea, places like that. All this is at the moment in derelict state. And so obviously food prices have gone up all over the world. And it's not easy for these countries to work, which are used to importing. I would remind our own people of the year 1966, when we had a thing called PL 480 going. I wonder if people remember what is PL 480. PL 480 was the program under which the Americans used to provide wheat to India at very highly subsidized rates and assistance, not even subsidized rates. It was demeaning for a country like India. Fortunately, in 2 to 3 years' time, we attained the Green Revolution, and we became self-sufficient as far as food is concerned. But many countries in Africa, some in Latin America, are not completely food self-sufficient, and this deficiency is definitely affecting them to a great extent. Many of them must be praying for an end to this war. It has also upset the entire energy matrix, pricing matrix as such. So far it was this area was peaceful. This area had a kind of a guaranteed, sustained movement of energy taking place at all times. Today, you have a major problem of insurance. First of all, because it's a war zone. Secondly, because of sanctions. That itself is causing a major impediment as far as movement of energy is concerned. Of course, Russian energy is now overflowing. Lots of it. India has just recently bought. I managed to get into the pipeline and managed to buy some of the subsidized energy from Russia. But this is not going to keep happening all the time. So besides upsetting the situation as far as the countries in the global south are concerned, it's even affecting us. Although, of course, we've got energy at cheaper prices, and Russian energy isn't bad at all. So definitely a war, a conventional war at one end of the world can cause a tremendous upset of the situation as far as major other countries are concerned, particularly in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you, General Hasnain. Next question is addressed to General Asthana. This question, to my mind, has already been answered, but I will still, because it's an important question. And the question is from Abhyudaya Saraswat. The question is, if Putin is pushed more and cornered, then is it possible that the nuclear dimension may be explored? And what is stopping it from going nuclear now? General Asthana.
Firstly, I'll take the second part first. As of now, Russia is certainly not in a hopeless situation that they should go in for nuclear dimension because they have gained, as was mentioned, and as the map which was shown by Dr. Adityanjee, you can make out that they have achieved, they've given security to Crimea, they've got a major portion of Donbass, they're still working, it's work in progress at other places. So the situation is not ripe for him to take that risk because firing a nuclear weapon it gets into a dimension from where you can't get back to the previous dimension. So it's a very major escalatory step. As far as if Putin is pushed more, now NATO is very, very sensitive to pushing Putin more or cornering Putin. If you recall, initially, Biden also gave a statement in the beginning of the war, I think it was second or third month, when somebody asked him, he said, no, regime change is not our aim. And when the talks of tanks started, that time also he came up, the White House briefing also mentioned that it is only for defense of Ukraine. We only want to talk of defense of Ukraine. Similarly, in EU Parliament, there was a discussion that you all are saying, I mean, there is one parliamentarian who opposed this giving aid to Ukraine by a very solid argument. She said, all of you are talking Russia must lose. There is nobody is talking that Ukraine should defend itself. The problem is that Russia should lose and Ukraine should win. We know that Ukraine cannot win. And Russia should lose is a situation where you want to be saved yourself in a manner that Russia, that we don't get into a nuclear dimension, or the NATO doesn't have to step in. NATO has not stepped in till date, only to ensure that Putin is not pushed to corner. So apparently the sensitivities are such that he will not be pushed to that corner. That's what is my anticipation. But if such a situation happens, let's say hypothetically the aircrafts are given and Zelensky becomes overzealous and strikes at Moscow, let's say hypothetically, I'm putting a purely hypothetical scenario, then maybe there can be a tactical nuclear strike. That's all I can think of, and that too into the heartland of Ukraine, and not onto the eastern side in the battleground or where the front line of the battle is concerned. But I do not visualize this situation. I do not visualize so far. I hope it answers that question.
Thank you, General Asthana. I'll go to the next question, which is again in the same dimension. It has come from Ron Jagannathan. At what point in the Ukraine war will Russia dispatch its nuclear submarines on the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean to threaten the United States to end support for Ukraine? General Hasnain?
I think the person asking this question is probably influenced by the 1962 Bay of Pigs. You know, when the Russians tried to place missiles in Cuba and threatened, or virtually threatening, the United States. Today, you should know the state of the Russian Navy to understand whether the Russians are in a position at all to take on the Americans as far off as the Pacific or the Atlantic or anywhere. Yes, notwithstanding, nuclear weapons are very much, can be there, they are all on nuclear armed submarines, they can be very much there. But why go as far as the Pacific or go as far as the Atlantic to initiate a nuclear weapon when you have the capability from within Russia itself? So I don't think this really makes any sense. I don't think the Russians are going to pick another front to start a war with the United States. So far, there is no direct confrontation with the United States. Everything is proxy through Ukraine. And if Putin is still balanced with in his mind, I don't think this kind of a situation is forthcoming.
Thank you, General.
Sir, if I may add, as far as Russia is concerned, they have only till now given nuclear signaling, and in that signaling, they did dispatch one of the ships, nuclear armed ships, to that area, and also the other signaling was that tanks may not be responded in the same manner. So this is, as of now, it is been left to the nuclear reference level, and that's about all. And as General Hasnain mentioned, they can strike from their own land, so why should they trigger unnecessarily and get embroiled elsewhere when, as it is, their Navy has got certain limitations. Back to you, back to Dr. Aditya.
Next question is from Dr. Vineet Singh, and I will pose it for General Katoch. Does G20 have any clout under Indian leadership to stop this war?
Very frankly, I think if the G20 gets together, they can stop this war. But it's not going to happen, and there are various reasons to it. The majority of the countries, as far as NATO is concerned, they are part of G20, and so is the United States. So the question of getting a ceasefire through the G20, I don't think it is going to take place. That is one. Number two, I don't think China, which is also part of the G20, is going to be interested. China is the last country which would like the India's G20 presidency to pull off a coup as big as getting peace between Russia and Ukraine. However, I think I'm inclined to, what General Hasnain had given in his initial comments, I'm inclined to agree with that. I don't think India would like to get involved. India will play, you would like to operate things from the back without any visibility. And to that extent, I think that the G20 will try to put pressure on various countries to say, let us get onto a peace agreement. But you will find nothing of this which is visible. Once it becomes visible and obvious, I think all attempts at a rapprochement or at getting peace are not going to succeed. So these will be efforts which I think are ongoing. I'm quite certain that India's Prime Minister as well as the NSA are on board on this process. The NSA incidentally has had a one-to-one meeting with the President Putin, and he doesn't give one-to-one meetings unless it's a very senior head of state. So there are many undercurrents which are in place, but will India take on an overt role? Will the G20 take on an overt role to both questions? In my view, I think it is unlikely, but there will be attempts made, and the undercurrents will be there to do it.
Thank you. The next question is from Mr. Sunil Bharti. And the question is that, keeping aside the Western narrative, what are the real and reliable number of lives lost by Ukraine and Russia? Is it really correct that Russians lost thousands of soldiers? Before I invite our panelists, in my brief introduction, I had mentioned that Ukraine probably has lost 200,000 of their fighters or men or whatever you may call, regular or irregular. And the conjecture is that probably Russia has also lost similar amount of their personnel. But I stand corrected if any of the panelists want to interject. Issue is that neither of the
I have a
parties.
slight opinion. I don't have a difference of opinion with you, but I just like to qualify something. I do feel that 200,000 is a very, very large figure. No doubt the Russians have been using a tremendous amount of artillery, missile fire, etc., drones, and they're known for this kind of a thing. Recalling for you the month of May 1969, when the Russians fired a barrage in a place called Damansky Island on the Ussuri River against the PLA, the Chinese PLA, and they wiped out the whole contingent of the PLA there, changed the course of the Ussuri River because the Damansky Island changed its shape. That's the amount of firepower that the Russians use, and that's a part of their doctrine. But you see, they haven't used infantry assaults, and so they themselves have perhaps not suffered to such an extent as is being assessed. If you remember right at the beginning itself, their attempts to get into built-up areas, in some areas in the Donbass general area, they have used infantry assaults. But if you see Bakhmut itself, here, they are making an access around, maneuvers are taking place around, they're attempting to cross the river, they're not crossed the river yet, they haven't crossed the river, particularly in the built-up areas. The general tendency of the Russians is to avoid the built-up areas and not fight in any of these urbanized terrain. So to my mind, I don't think the Russians have lost that many as being assessed. This is a part of the information and psychological war, which has been launched by NATO and the West also. Yes.
Other panelists, any conjectures on casualties on either side? Looks like there's no sort of opinion about it. It has not been without loss to either party, this conflict. And as it is going on, the figures will continue to change. Probably will never know the exact figure, just like you have a situation with China that 2 years after the Galwan conflict, maybe 4 people died and all that sort of thing. So we probably will not know, but bottom line is that there's heavy loss of life on both the sides. I have a lot of questions here in the chat function, but we are running out of time. We are almost 1 hour and 30 minutes, and I don't want to prolong this discussion further. It has been very educational, very fascinating discussion, and I am very thankful to our 3 distinguished panelists who are involved in multiple such activities and have to pull themselves out of one panel discussion to join this particular panel discussion. So I'm really, really very thankful to our panelists. I am very thankful to our audience members who joined on a weekend for 1.5 hours on a very dry subject, because it has become a kind of stale news, Ukraine war, and the general apathy has set in. Lastly, I'm also thankful to Team CSA, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Rajiv Verma, Mr. Amod Desai, and Mr. Ankush Bhandari. These are part of the core team who helped me organize these discussions. We have not heard the last word on Ukraine war, I may say. We have talked about what are Putin's intention, what are Zelensky's this thing. The issue that we have not factored is what are Biden's expectation and what does Xi Jinping want. Informal discussions are going on, and there are hints that the current establishment wants to dismember Russian Federation, just like Soviet Union was dismantled at the end of Cold War. So there's a megalomania everywhere. If I may remind, people are thinking of far-fetched scenario. As far as China is concerned, there are some questions there. So I will ask those audience members who want to ask about China's role or China's posture. I am happy to announce that our next program, our distinguished lecture, will be on March 25th, Saturday, by one of India's top academic sinologists, Professor Shrikant Kondapalli from Jawaharlal Nehru University, who will be giving a lecture on China's posture on Ukraine war, specifically on that area. So we will reconvene at that time. And thank you very much indeed for everyone to participate in this very fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honor to be
Thank you.
on this
Thank you
panel.
so much.